we have Avinash from APC here, and he's gonna present a very interesting game, internet shutdown game.
So I'm Avinash, and I work as part of the tech team at APC, a nonprofit that works around the globe on various digital rights issues. DEF is one of our members, and we're a network organization. So one of the things we noticed when working with people, human rights defenders around the world, talking about internet shutdowns, which are a growing problem everywhere, but especially in South Asia, we realized that a lot of people talking about internet shutdowns didn't fully understand how the internet technically worked. And when you don't really know how the thing you're working with functions, it makes it much harder to navigate shutdowns, really understand how these problems can often be circumvented by individuals. Okay, so when we say shutdowns, we don't only mean the total shutting down of the internet, the cables are unplugged, and you have no way of contacting anyone nearby. The word shutdown encompasses a really large number of ways of limiting the amount of information you have access to through the internet. So these are a bunch of different words that are often used in place of shutdowns. Some of these words, those of us in India are extremely familiar with. We use curfews, a form of internet shutdowns, all the time for various reasons, including someone has an exam, so let's stop the internet. And so once you start thinking about shutdowns in this more expansive way, you realize how often shutdowns are occurring all around us. So the point of this game is that let's understand how internet infrastructure works, and this will give us the tools to start understanding how to circumvent shutdowns. Because often the way shutdowns are implemented, they're not one way. Governments use, and ISPs use a multitude of methods to actually shut down the internet. Some of them are very technically simple, and therefore very simple to circumvent, while others are increasingly complex and pose a much larger threat to human rights, to people's access to information, to the economy as well. The point is that, you can write a big book, or you can have one big web page which explains all of this information in a way that 12 people will ever read and no one will care about. And we thought a more fun way of doing this is to make a game. Now, it's still an informative game, so there's a bunch of stuff that you have to learn in the beginning before you can start playing, but that's the idea, right? Let's make it a little bit less dull. Okay, so this is a map of a fictional country's internet infrastructure. On the map, you can see that there are a bunch of devices, and everything above this red dotted line is this fictional country. And everything below the red dotted line is the rest of the world, often where the information we want is stored, and the servers we want to talk to are located. So each one of these devices has something called an IP address when it connects to the internet. Every device on the internet, every server, every computer, every mobile phone, every router has an IP address. And that IP address is the way in which two devices can send messages to one another. Without that, messages would just float into the ether and then dissipate, right? They need somewhere to go, and the IP address gives us that. So then your devices get connected to some Wi-Fi router or to a physical router, and then eventually they get connected to an ISP. And you have different kinds of networks represented on this map in this country. And it's just representative. Any country would have thousands, if not millions, of networks like this. The network on the top left is a fairly simple one. It's a bunch of computers connected to a router, then connected to an ISP. You have a mobile network on the bottom right here, and you have the most interesting network represented on this map over there with the red lines and the dots. Is there anyone in this room who can guess or knows what that represents? What kind of network? someone's mesh, that's right. So that's a mesh network. And if you see in that, every device is connected to one or more other devices and not necessarily directly to the ISP or some central router. And this means that each one of these devices is providing some form of redundant connection between one another before it reaches the ISP. So if you take out one of the devices, the rest of them still stay connected. If you add in some more, the stress on the network doesn't increase, it actually it improves the network the more you add to it, to a point. Everything in moderation, right? Okay. So ISPs are internet service providers. We all use them. Your internet service provider could be like landline, fiber-based, B2C companies that you use, like, I don't know, which is everywhere, right? But it also includes all the other ISPs that give us mobile internet, from your Airtels and your Geos and what have you. Now, and in some cases, it will include the community networks that tie up with a larger ISP in countries like ours, but which provide you the end internet access. Now, ISPs, there are dozens of them in a country like this, but even in this fictional country, we have 4 ISPs. Now, the ISPs have to send data between one another and then eventually out of the country. And in order for this information that's being transmitted, you need some ways for all of this information to be seamlessly interconnected without too many cross connections, make it kind of efficient. So you have internet exchange points. Now, in some countries, these are government owned. In some countries, they're public-private partnerships. In others, they're entirely private. It varies. And in some, you have a few IXPs. In others, you have thousands. The IXPs connect this whole national infrastructure together. So right now, you're seeing an almost complete, but not quite, picture of the infrastructure that's built inside the country in order to create access to the internet. Okay, so do you notice the lines connecting all of the cell towers here? I'd like you all to pay attention to the fact that everything here is connected by lines, and these lines represent physical connections. Your use of a mobile device or on Wi-Fi or a 4G, 3G network, whatever it is, it's a physical connection, you just can't see it, to some router, to a cell tower, and that cell tower is connected physically through probably fiber or cable to another cell tower, to somewhere else, to an ISP. Everything you are sending on your phone, it seems like it disappears into the ether and arrives at some server somewhere you don't know about, but it is traveling through physical cables throughout its journey. Instantaneously, like almost just a fraction of a second before it reaches where it needs to go, but it's happening through physical means. And that's a very important thing to remember. Okay, eventually all of this data we're talking about has to leave the country and go talk to whatever server you want to access, which, let's face it, majority of the time is outside the country. So we have 2 international gateways represented on the map, and that's what they're called, international gateways. The bridge and the way we connect our national internet infrastructure to the rest of the world. And each country has its own national internet infrastructure, but we can't represent all of it, so it's just shown in this rest of the world cloud symbol. So here we have one gateway that's traditional satellite connection and another that's an undersea cable, right? And your data travels and reaches that from an ISP through that connection and reaches another ISP somewhere in the rest of the world. And it's true that most of our gateways, both here and in most countries, are often owned or at least co-owned or operated by an ISP, by some private sector internet service provider. In some countries, of course, the entire internet infrastructure is owned by the state, and this changes the dynamics of how shutdowns happen. The more diverse the national internet infrastructure is, and the more spread out gateways are between different kinds of players, the more complex it is, and in some ways, the advantage is that the government has less control in shutting down the internet, right? Okay, keep moving. So then we have more stuff showing up on the rest of the world. The server you want to reach is the thing you need to pay attention to. It's right here, all right? We also have a VPN server. Okay, we're gonna add one slightly complicated layer to this map. DNS. So DNS stands for Domain Name Service. And when you type a URL like www.def.org into your browser, you're typing something that's human and you can spell and you can remember, as opposed to the name of the server that DEF's website is actually sitting on, which would be 197 dot some bunch of numbers, right? The IP address. So we needed a system to make sure that all of these IP addresses that relate to the devices and the servers primarily have a way of being resolved while not ensuring every one of you has to use those IP addresses. So I think the age in this room is lower than the age I'm used to. So how many of you have ever used a telephone book, a Yellow Pages or a White Pages? Put up your hands. My God, you're all so young. Okay, so there was this thing called landlines and Yellow Pages and White Pages, and it's usually a very helpful metaphor for explaining DNS, but I don't know if that metaphor will work. So I'm going to do this bizarre thing of explaining something that's dead, the White Pages or the Yellow Pages, and then use that to explain DNS to you. Let's see if it works. Okay, so back when everybody had landlines and no one had cell phones, and no one could save a contact in their address book, we all had to memorize 5 or 6 numbers of the people we most cared about, and the rest of the time we wrote down the numbers of the other people we knew in a little book, and we looked up their numbers and dialed them in physically. And when you wanted to talk to someone you didn't have in your own phone book, you would buy a Yellow Pages or White Pages. Yellow Pages listed all the businesses, White Pages listed all the landline private phones in that city. Because so few people could afford landline phones, you could actually print a book with all the numbers. And you scroll down in this alphabetically arranged book and you found the name of the business of the person you were looking for, and you look on the left and find the telephone number you had to dial. And often, even though it was very small, there were many volumes, A to C, C to E, and so on. You'd have a pile of books that would represent all of the numbers you ever needed, right? So DNS is a little bit like this telephone directory. You type in www.def.org in your browser, and your browser talks to a DNS server, a DNS server being this telephone directory, and asks it, what's the IP address, the phone number of def.org. And if that DNS server that you first speak to, so if you're on the top left of the map and you're one of those devices and you haven't changed your DNS settings, which we'll get to, you're likely going to talk, the first DNS server you're going to talk to, your browser's going to talk to, is the DNS server of your ISP. And it'll ask the ISP's DNS server, what's the address for this URL? And if it knows, it'll send it back to the browser, and the browser will then make a connection to that IP address. But maybe your ISP has never heard of def.org before, so it's like, I don't know. So then that DNS server will ask another DNS server, and it'll keep asking DNS servers in a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy, but it's complicated and not important to understand, until it finds the authoritative answer for what is the IP address for this domain, this URL. And it'll send it back to the browser, and the browser will make that connection. So the important thing to understand here is you're a device somewhere there. When you want to talk to def.org, which happens to be on a server you want to reach somewhere else in the world, because that's where it's hosted, you're first making a connection to the DNS server, your browser. That DNS server is making a connection, if it needs to get the answer. That answer of what the IP address is you need to talk to is sent back to your browser, and your browser makes another connection to the actual server you want to speak to. So it's a two-step process. There's three if you include what the DNS server is doing, but it's not one, and that's another important thing. So I'm going to ask you to do a quick mental exercise. Usually we have physical copies of the maps and everybody's sitting on tables and you all have a map amongst maybe 10 of you and you can draw this all out. But this room is very much not conducive to that format. So do it for yourselves and trust that you've got the answer right. So you are in the top central network, right? You are a mobile or a computer there. With your hands in the air or in your minds, you draw the route that you would take, your data would take, to reach the server you want to reach in the rest of the world. Just do it for yourselves for a second. Thought you could jump directly from your device that you chose to either the IXP or to the server you want to reach. If you didn't follow a specific purple line all the way to the server you want to reach and then cross the rest of the world, you skip steps. Like your data has to follow one of those routes, right? And every point on this map that can be controlled by the state, which is an ISP, an IXP, or the gateway, is a point where a shutdown can happen. So if you're jumping this, you're not able to see where the shutdown's happening. So just make sure you're following that path. If you're there, you're following it from the ISP to the closest IXP, from the IXP to the closest next ISP that has a gateway, international gateway, through that gateway into the rest of the world, through various similar steps in the rest of the world, and finally to the server you want to reach. Okay. So usually we do two groups. Again, the format in this room changes a little bit, okay? But the rest of this stays the same. We're going to present scenarios of a shutdown that some government is doing in this fictional country based on that same map. And you will be given circumvention cards, okay? Particular tools that you can use to circumvent this shutdown. We need you to work in groups. So in this room, what we're going to do is, whichever row you're sitting in, just divide yourself into two, and whoever's sitting next to you, they're your new teammates, your best friends right now. And if you're sitting isolated alone on a row, tap the person in front of you and join their group, all right? And you're going to discuss how to circumvent each of the shutdowns that come up. as we keep moving. Does this work? Yeah, cool. So we presented this thing. We're going to explain how that government has shut down the internet, but you won't be given all the information because when you're experiencing a shutdown, you don't have much. You got to guess how this shutdown is working, right? And there are various kinds of shutdowns, and each of them will emerge as we play today. Okay, so the point of these cards, right, is that some of them are fairly simple, right? Have a backup internet connection, have two ways of connecting to the internet. And for some scenarios, that's all you need. You need a second way, and because the first way doesn't work. And some of them are very difficult to really use in the real world, like a satellite connection. And by the satellite connection, we mean a low orbit satellite. So if you go back to that map, in the corner at the bottom here, apart from the two international gateways, we have a low orbit satellite. How many of you here have heard of Starlink or Project Kuiper, both owned by megalomaniac men? Okay, so these are low orbit satellites. Starlink is owned by Elon Musk. Some of you must be fans. I'm very disappointed. And it's, for now, low cost, not for long. I mean, it's a profitable business, eventually wants to be, where it's a totally different technology from traditional satellite connections, which are high orbit. They're high up in the atmosphere, and it costs a lot to put them up there, and it costs a lot to communicate with them with big dishes. It's a trickier technology, whereas low orbit satellites, like the ones that Starlink and Kuiper use, are much closer to you, and they have small portable dishes that you plug in and you connect. And if you're from a rich, quote-unquote, first world country, many people have started adopting these technologies to get direct connections to the rest of the world, to the internet. Because it's a very nascent technology, and it's so new that it's unregulated currently. Most of the countries don't really regulate it. This is a way of bypassing your national infrastructure, right? Everything else, when you're using this map, you're using this national infrastructure chain to connect to the rest of the world. But when you use a low orbit satellite, you jump from your computer directly to that low orbit satellite and you're in the rest of the world. So the blockages that your nation state might be imposing on you don't apply. But the costs for us in the, again, quote-unquote, global south of using technologies like this are prohibitive. They are ridiculously expensive, even now when they're supposed to be introductory and cheap. So, in our cards, in these scenarios that will be presented, you can only use the satellite connection once, because it's like I just realized you can't say Trump card in the same way that you could before, but it's the Trump card. It circumvents a lot of stuff for now. So you can only use that once. The rest of these cards are like the backup connection. They're varying levels of complexity, but they're good for a lot of scenarios. But the real thing we want from this game is conversation. It's for you to come up with new ideas, new things, talk about experiences you've had in circumventing things that aren't represented on these simple cards. And it's the wild card that's the most exciting part of this game. Come up with random new ways of, and completely crazy ideas, anything is fine, to circumvent the shutdown we present, right? And some of the scenarios we present have no solutions with the cards here at all. The only thing to do is to use a wild card to talk about possible alternatives. Are we ready to do this? Yes? Okay, great. at least Gomer is excited. Okay, so this is a very simple one. This is your first scenario. It's exam time, and the government has imposed a broadband curfew. You have broadband at home, and your internet connection is down. What card, from the same card, I'll show it to you again, of that list, can you use to circumvent this shutdown? And we first take a look at the map of how this shutdown is happening. So the X's represent where the connections have been terminated, because the government has told these ISPs to terminate those connections. Okay? And these are the cards you have to play. So start talking it within your groups, split yourselves halfway up this room, and it's each of your rows. Remember that. And as soon as you have an idea, put up your hand. I or someone else, Pranita will be with you with a mic, and we can talk about your idea. Yeah? I'll keep switching between the map and the cards so you get both pieces of information. 5 minutes. It's a simple one. So one of the questions we have is, what is a backup internet connection? So you have one connection for your fiber connection from ACT. A backup internet connection might be having another internet connection from Airtel, but also having a 4G connection in your phone. That's another backup connection, right? You have more than one way to connect to the internet. So if one is compromised, it doesn't mean that the other will be. But it does depend a lot on the map, all right? So it depends on how the shutdown's working. We have a solution, which is use a SIM card, which would count as a backup internet connection, right? So the second connection you had one fiber connection, and your backup is a SIM card with a 4G connection, right? And on the map, you can see that all the ISPs that are providing cable or physical connections have been cut off. But the ISP that also has two connections, two networks. One is a fiber, whatever, or cable network going to the top right, and the cell network is unblocked. And often, in many countries which do this kind of shutdown, the exam time and now let's shut down the internet, an Asian phenomenon. We have solidarity with other countries here. This is what happens. They keep one entire kind of connections open, mobile connections open, or they keep all landline connections open and only shut down mobile connections. So having both connections available to you allows you to circumvent a simple shutdown like this. So a very common scenario, right? Content is being blocked. To quell protests, the government has blocked access to Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp during an election. What cards do you use to bypass the blockage? Everyone's saying a VPN. Okay, so in this scenario, the X's are not where you see them. Instead, you have little filtery symbols, very cute. Now you can't see them, I can tell you, they were very cute symbols. And they were on every single ISP on the map, okay? Every ISP was filtering the traffic. And how your VPN, and in some ways the Tor, somewhat similar technologies work, so we'll do the same fiction as before. We are in the top left network, and from there, you want to reach the server you want to reach. You follow a path from ISP to IXP to ISP, cross the international gateway, and to the server you want to reach. And the government and the ISPs, because they can ask the ISPs to reveal this, can see exactly the path and where you are, whom you are talking to. So, and they're probably blocking not the IP address, but the URL you want to use, the domain name. So each of these ISPs sees your request, sees that it contains the domain facebook.com, and says, drop this, just throw away this traffic, don't give them a response. Or give them a response saying, this site has been blocked by some order, which probably never existed, right? And that's only because it has that name in it, right? WhatsApp.com or Facebook.com. So how VPN works is that all your traffic, which is encrypted, flows from your computer through the ISPs all the way the same route to the VPN server instead, whichever the VPN is. The VPN server then relays your message to the actual server you want to reach, gets a response, sends it back to the VPN server, which relays it back to you, right? So it's a proxy, really, right? Like you want to send messages to someone across the room in this same space, right? But you don't want someone to know. So if you're passing the message, and I'm watching messages pass all the time, all the way to here, I can see the path. So I can see you, and I can see where it reached. But what if I can only see it reached there, but once it reaches the person you're speaking to, and I'm going to use you as a volunteer for this example, the person in red doesn't forward this by physically passing it on to the actual person you want to speak, but text that message to someone. Now, I can see this message reaching to here, but I can no longer know where that message was first sent. In fact, I may not know that the message was sent further at all. I might just think you're talking to her. And since I don't have a problem with you talking to her, I won't block this. My real problem is you talking to Goman. So if I see you talking to Goman, then I'll block that. But as long as there is some connection that I cannot see between them, you're fine. And that's the same. That's how VPN works. Tor is very similar. A VPN is usually privately owned, and there's one server or multiple servers that act as this proxy, whereas Tor is a network of hundreds and thousands and millions of volunteers who sign into the Tor network and then offer their own devices and IP addresses for this relay is. So when you connect to Tor, you don't know what the endpoint is, but it's doing the same form of relay. Okay, let's go back to this. And I just want to point out that there were some other cards you could use for that same scenario. Any guesses as to which one, or answers? Changing the DNS. That's right. Okay, so the way in which the shutdown's happening, we said they're dropping all the content for a specific domain name, is because they've asked the ISPs to change the DNS records in the country for that domain and point it somewhere else or drop traffic. If you just stop using your ISP's DNS, use OpenDNS servers, or if you're sad and you want to use Google's. You bypass your country's DNS network, and therefore whatever blockages you're using. It's like saying, don't use the telephone directory provided by your municipality. Use the telephone directory that you got shipped to you from somewhere abroad. And now you have a bunch of new numbers, or the numbers that haven't been redacted in your directory. Okay, so I don't know how much time do we have left. No, great. Okay, so we will jump to another slightly different one that we're increasingly familiar with. So, like many countries, this government has said they will punish anyone they can prove is using a VPN. When you want to use a VPN. So how do you ensure that you can't get caught? You're not caught while using this VPN. This is the challenge. Okay, so there's you can use your trump card and use a satellite, but the real trick is to have a conversation. And just remember the conversation we had about how VPNs work just now. And give me something from the wildcards. Or just explain to me how you won't get caught while using a VPN.
RDP to a cloud instance and use a website in that, browser website in that.
That's a great thing. So a remote desktop connection to some computer in the cloud and use that to make the connection, which is working almost exactly like a VPN, but with GUI and making it super slow and miserable in the middle. Okay, any more? But it'll totally work. So, sorry, I didn't catch what that.
I can use Tor.
You can use Tor, alright. And Tor works so much like a VPN that it's basically the same thing, but it might be slow, but it'll totally work.
But I can't
You can't?
But I can't get caught.
You can't get caught. So, how does one get caught using a VPN? Can people put their hands and let me know how you think you get caught while using a VPN? Okay.
It's IP address.
Which IP address?
Your local server IP address.
Sorry?
The latest server.
The server IP address. Okay, so that's the thing, which, this is great. I'm glad we're right here. So, what she's saying is that they're tracing the IP address of the VPN server you're connecting to. They know that IP address of the VPN server. And so when you try to connect to it, they're like, we know you're connected to a VPN server. You're using a VPN, jail for you. Right? But this is true to some extent, but it's not entirely true. There are thousands and millions of VPN servers out there. So if you're using the ones that you can't escape the ads for, many of you are on the same ad algorithm that I'm on the internet, you have not been able to escape the Surfshark ads, and you might have been caught into buying one. And if you're using one of those, the government can probably trace it. Because they have, Surfshark will have 20, 100 IP addresses for servers they operate around the world, and the government can figure out each one of those IP addresses sooner or later. And if you're using one of them, it knows you're using one. But there are hundreds of VPN providers. There are ones that are very obscure and very focused on privacy, and which change their IP addresses every day. And if you use a VPN provider who isn't very well known, there's no way the government can know the IP addresses of all the VPN servers they operate. And so you'll never be caught. Were there any other things in the room? Or how to use a VPN? We have two ways of doing it. Tor, we have use an RDP, which is great. A foreign SIM card. Oh, I love this. Okay. So, no, it doesn't. And it doesn't work everywhere. So someone suggested using a foreign SIM card. And now we get to my favorite card in this game is the foreign SIM card. Because the foreign SIM card is not a technical solution at all. It's a solution because I don't know how many lawyers are there in this room, but lawyers are stupid and they made life so complicated they gave us a loophole. This is not a technical solution. It's a lawyer solution. It's great. So some countries, sadly, this doesn't always work in India, but in many countries, the way roaming contracts are signed between different ISPs, mobile network providers, means that some contracts say that the country's ISPs cannot impose national restrictions on their foreign SIM roaming clients because they have to have the same level of access as was given to them by their original mobile provider. And those, if you happen to be in China, which has enormous amounts of restrictions on contact, right? China, most of the Chinese mobile network providers have signed roaming agreements with a lot of providers where they cannot restrict content for roaming users. So you've bypassed all of the national blockages. But it has nothing to do with technical things. There's some technical person who has written rules to prevent the blockages happening for you when you're using a roaming SIM, right? Now, this doesn't work in India most of the time because we're not really allowed to write such contracts here. But lots of countries do. And this is a great trick out. Well, anything else? Or move on to the house? I'm so worried about time. 10 minutes more. Are you all game for 10 minutes more, or are you just done with me? And it's totally fine if you are. I won't cry in front of you. I'll go home and cry. Okay. So you are in a protest together with your friends, you're using the mobile network, and you have a good cell phone reception, but you're unable to send or receive messages. You suspect the network is jammed. What can you use to stay connected to your fellow protesters? And this is a wildcard only scenario. There is no way any of these cards will work. right? Because you got me. The satellite connection also won't work here because who's carrying a Starlink to a protest and finding a plug point to set it up? It's not going to happen. So none of these work. So it's just up to you to now think of new ways of breaking this. The maps are not helpful either. All the cell towers are blocked. Sorry? But again, the internet's blocked. So how do you connect to the internet at all when you're being jammed? Sorry, just because we didn't do the mic. They suggested voice over IP, right? So there's lots of technologies out there that allow you to make phone calls, traditional phone calls, seemingly, over the internet protocol. But you don't have access to the internet, so it won't work right now. Okay, great. Why don't you pass the mic there? It's just me repeating everything you're saying.
So creating your own network so that all the peers will connect to that particular servers you create for the connections, and then relaying the messages within your connected nodes of that particular network.
Yeah, so creating a temporary network or a permanent network that is not state controlled or controlled in the same way locally is a simple way of bypassing this in terms of communicating with each other. Because within this network, and this network could be small and just be 20 devices in a small region, or it could be connecting three relatively close by villages. I mean, we're here talking about community networks. Every one of the community networks that's being set up that doesn't completely rely on commercial ISP provided infrastructure is capable of doing this, right? Because at the end of the day, all of the blocks that are happening, it's not, the government isn't coming and cutting some cable. It's telling some ISP, don't do this. Don't give somebody access. Don't allow this to be turned on. And if you own your connection mechanisms, you are not enslaved by this order or pseudo order. So that's one, all this thing. But what if you don't have the resources to set up all this? It takes some infrastructure, no? You have to set up like actual network infrastructure to get this to happen. So are there other ways of circumventing this kind of shutdown? To just get messages within the group at least. Have you heard of tools that allow for you to do this?
Bluetooth connections.
Bluetooth connections. That's great. So there is an app out there that is doing Bluetooth-based message relay systems. Where if you want to talk to the person at the back of the room using Bluetooth connection, it's possible I will not be able to connect to them, right? So instead, you create a Bluetooth-based community network, really, that connects all of us in the messages relay. And there's an app called Briar that you can use to set up connections like this. Actually, there are a bunch of apps, and
I think new node and all the way. New node.
mystery wise, I lost it. Oh, you New node, right? Yeah. And there's I forgot the name of. There's an APC member whose name is taking a second, and they're not in the room, so I'm glad. Equality with an IE also produces a couple of similar apps that allow for Bluetooth-based relay of messages, or setting up a similar system using Wi-Fi access points made from your mobile devices to connect to one another to relay messages. So these are other ways to send a message in a small space or a relatively small area without using any of the national infrastructure. And I'm guessing we're almost out of time. Okay, so we're not going to do this one, but I just want to leave you with this slightly miserable scenario. So, how many of you in this room have heard of deep packet inspections? No? Well, sad and good for you, I guess, both, because it's a scary technology, and it's getting more it's getting more and more rampant everywhere. Okay, so DPI technology allows ISPs and therefore states to break the HTTPS barrier. Right? Usually, all of your data, when it's sent over the HTTPS, which stands for secure protocol, is encrypted. They can see whom you're speaking to, which is why they can trace your use of a VPN, but they can't see what you're saying. DPI, because compute power has increased so much, allows states to break HTTPS also without even breaking it, just measure the length of messages you're sending and other things, and then try to guess what it is you're saying or what kind of things you are sending. Are you sending images? Are you sending videos? Are you sending text? It's simple. The length of those things are vastly different. And you can see patterns in the way people are speaking. Are all your communications going to only one server? Even if I've never heard that IP address, it must be a VPN, right? Because they're only talking to one other server? That's crazy. So this kind of stuff is happening and people are beginning to trace more and more things. And none of the cards we showed you will ever work for DPI. But you create technology and people create counter technology. So there's an emerging range of DPI countermeasures that are coming, but they're nascent and they're not foolproof. But it's a conversation we should be having because the state is getting more advanced than the people trying to circumvent it right now. Okay, so I will stop with the game because we're out of time, and I'll leave you with this little note. For those of you who found this fun or found this interesting or thought it was a great way to learn about both internet infrastructure and shutdowns, this game is available at the shutdowngame.apc.org. Hope you enjoy it or learn something from it. Thanks so much for your time.